Hannah was 11 minutes from her front door when she noticed the footsteps behind her had stopped. That should have been a relief. It wasn't, because she had stopped first. She'd paused to shift her bag to the other shoulder, and in that half-second of silence, the steps behind her went quiet too, not fading into the distance, not carrying on past her, just waiting. She started walking again. So did they. Same pace, same distance. And Hannah, 24 years old, on a street she'd walked 1,000 times, understood that whoever was behind her was not going anywhere. He was going where she was going. Stay with me. Hannah's walk home is coming. But first, get comfortable. Pull the blanket up. Let the rain do its work. You're listening to True Horror Stories for Sleep. Tonight, 12 stories about the walk home. Ordinary streets, ordinary nights, the route you could do half asleep. And the moment it stopped being ordinary. All of them real. All told slowly and quietly, so you can drift off whenever your body decides it's time. If these stories keep you company through the sleepless hours, subscribe so you never lose us. Leave a like, so more of the sleepless find their way here, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Now, lights off. Story 1. Story 1. The car that kept pacing. This comes from a woman named Aisha, and it happened in 2014, in a suburb of Manchester, England. Aisha was 19, and worked evening shifts at a supermarket. Her walk home was 22 minutes. She knew it to the minute because she'd timed it. Through a residential area with wide streets, hedges, parked cars, and the orange wash of sodium streetlights. It was the most boring walk in the world. That's what she loved about it. One Tuesday in November, about 6 minutes in, a car pulled out of a side street ahead of her and stopped at the curb. Engine running, lights on. She walked past it without much thought, the way you walk past 100 idling cars. A minute later, it passed her, and stopped again, 40 meters ahead. Aisha's first read was completely reasonable. Someone lost, checking directions on a phone, moving in fits and starts. She kept walking. She passed it again, and she deliberately didn't look in, because looking in felt like an invitation. Then it passed her a third time, and stopped again. There's a particular kind of arithmetic that starts up in your head at that moment, and Aisha says it's the loudest thinking she's ever done. 3 times could still be innocent. 3 times could be a delivery driver, a nervous learner, a man arguing with his sat-nav. But there was a shape to it now, a rhythm. Pass, stop, wait for her to catch up, pass again. And the rhythm was the thing that frightened her, because rhythms are chosen. She did something she'd been told to do years earlier by an older cousin, advice she'd rolled her eyes at when she heard it. She turned around and walked back the way she'd come, not running, just turning, calmly, and walking in the opposite direction. Because a car on a one-way residential street can't follow you backwards without making itself extremely obvious. Behind her, she heard the engine. She heard it rev, then idle, then rev again. And then she heard the specific ugly noise of a 3-point turn done badly and fast in a narrow street. Aisha ran, not home. She was very clear about this. And it's the part of the story she most wants people to hear. She did not run towards her own front door. She ran to the nearest house with lights on, and a car in the drive, and she went up the path, and hammered on the door with the flat of her hand. An older couple opened it. She said, "There's a car following me. Please can I stand here?" And the man came out onto his step, in his socks, and stood there with his arms folded, looking down the street. The car came round the corner slowly, saw a lit doorway, a girl, and a man standing on his own step watching. And it kept going, at a completely normal speed, like nothing had ever happened, and turned at the end of the road and was gone. The couple called the police and drove her the remaining 8 minutes home. She never got a plate. She'd been too busy walking, and then too busy running to think of it. There was nothing to report but a dark saloon car and a pattern. Aisha is 31 now. She has never once, in 12 years, walked directly home when something felt wrong. She says the instinct everybody has is exactly backwards. When you're scared, you want your own door, your own key, your own hallway. But your own door is the one place a follower most wants you to lead him. Take a breath. Let that settle into the rain. Story 2. Story 2. He knew her name. This one comes from a woman named Corinne, and it happened in 2009, in Portland, Oregon. Corinne was 26, and walking home from a friend's apartment around 11 at night, about 15 blocks, a route she took often. It was drizzling, the fine, permanent Portland drizzle that isn't worth an umbrella. She had her hood up and her hands in her pockets. Halfway home, on a quiet block between two busier streets, a man's voice behind her said, clearly and pleasantly, "Corinne?" She turned around. Of course she turned around. That's what a name does. It takes the decision out of your hands. Your body turns before you've agreed to it. There was a man about 15 feet back, hood up, hands in his pockets, smiling. And he said, "Sorry, I thought you were someone else." Corinne said it was fine, turned back around and kept walking. And it took her a full block and a half to work out what was wrong with what had just happened. He had said her name. Then he had said he'd mistaken her for someone else. But if he'd mistaken her for someone else, and that someone else was named Corinne, then it was a coincidence, of a kind that basically doesn't occur. And if he hadn't mistaken her for anyone, then he knew her name, and had said it, and then immediately pretended not to. She realized she'd handed him something in that moment. Not information, confirmation. He'd said a name into the dark, and a woman had turned around. Now he knew. Corinne did not go home. She went into a bar 2 blocks over. Brightly lit. Busy. The kind of place with a bouncer at the door on a weekend. She sat at the bar for 40 minutes, and nursed a drink she didn't want. And she watched the front window. He walked past it twice. The second time, she pointed him out to the bartender, who got the doorman, and the two of them went out and had a conversation with him on the pavement. Corinne watched through the glass. The man was calm, gestured, laughed, shook his head. The whole vocabulary of a guy being reasonable about a misunderstanding. Then he walked away. The doorman came back in and said something Corinne has never forgotten. He said, "He knew your name. He used it when he was telling us you were confused." Corinne got a ride home. She spent the next week trying to work out where a stranger would have learned her name, and she found an answer that made her feel sick with how ordinary it was. She wore a work lanyard. Her badge had her first name on it in large letters, and she'd walked 15 blocks with it clipped to her bag, visible to anyone behind her, every night for a year. Not magic, not surveillance, just a name, printed large, on the back of a woman walking alone in the dark, night after night, on a predictable route, at a predictable time. She takes the lanyard off at the door now. She has, for 17 years. Let the rain wash that one away. Story 3. Story 3. The Umbrella. This story comes from a man named Junho, and it happened in 2018, in Seoul. Junho was in his late 20s, walking home from the subway at about midnight. It was raining hard. He didn't have an umbrella, and had resigned himself to getting soaked over the 10-minute walk. At the top of the station stairs, a man was standing with 2 umbrellas. One open above him, one closed at his side. He held out the closed one to Junho, and said, in the friendliest way, "Take it. My wife always gives me 2. Junho hesitated, then laughed and took it, and thanked him. Small kindness in a big city. He walked off into the rain, feeling better about the world. About 4 minutes later, he stopped under an awning to answer a text. And while he stood there, he happened to look back down the street. The man was behind him, perhaps 30 meters, standing still under his own umbrella. Not walking, not on a phone, just standing in the rain, facing Junho's direction. Junho started walking again, and this time he watched in the reflections. Shop windows, parked car glass, the dark mirror of a rain-slick street. And the man moved when he moved, and stopped when he stopped, for 3 more blocks. Here's the detail that turned Junho's stomach, and it's the reason this story sits with people. He looked down at the umbrella in his hand, and realized it wasn't wet. Not the fabric, not the ribs, not the handle. It had been raining for hours. A closed umbrella that had been carried through that rain would have been soaked. It hadn't been outside. It had been kept dry, indoors or in a bag, and brought out to be given away. Junho did not go home. He walked into a 24-hour convenience store, the kind on every corner in Seoul, bright as an operating theater, with a clerk and CCTV. And he bought a coffee he didn't drink and stood there for half an hour. The man walked past the window, once, then didn't come back. Junho left the umbrella in the store's umbrella stand, and he asked the clerk to keep an eye on him as he left. And he took a route home that doubled back twice. He reported it, and police were interested, though there was nothing to charge. Nobody had done anything but give a stranger an umbrella. That's the whole horror of it. The perfect deniability of a kind act. The umbrella was a leash, not a tracker, nothing so technical. Just an object that creates a small, warm obligation between 2 people, and a reason to follow someone, and a reason to speak to them again. Later. Hey, my umbrella. Junho says the lesson took him a long time to phrase, because he didn't want to become a person who refuses kindness. What he landed on was this. It isn't the kindness that tells you something. It's whether the person walks away afterwards. Real generosity ends the interaction. Something else keeps it open. Check your doors locked if you need to. I'll wait. The rain isn't going anywhere. If you're still awake and want more nights like this is a good moment. Subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments about a walk home you'll never forget. If you're drifting off, ignore all of that. Sleep is the whole point. Story 4. Story 4. The shortcut she always took. This one comes from a woman named Bethany, and it happened in 2011, in Leeds. Bethany was a student, and between her campus and her flat, there was a footpath. A proper little cut-through between 2 housing estates. Tarmac, hedges either side. Maybe 200 meters end to end. It saved 8 minutes. Everyone used it. She'd used it twice a day for 2 years. One evening in February, she came to the mouth of the path at about 7. Full dark, but early enough that it didn't feel like night. And she stopped, because something was different. The lights were out. Not all of them. There were 4 lamps along that path, and the 2 in the middle were dark. The ones at each end still worked, so from where she stood, the path was lit at the entrance, lit at the exit, and black in the middle, maybe 80 meters of it. Bethany stood there for a while, doing what all of us do, negotiating with ourselves. Bulbs go out. Councils are slow. It's a path she'd walked 400 times. There were people about. She could hear a television through a window. The alternative was 8 extra minutes in the cold, which felt, at 19, like a genuinely serious cost. She didn't take it. She says she still doesn't know exactly why. Something about the 2 lamps, about the middle 2, specifically, and not the ends, sat wrong with her, in a way she couldn't argue away. She went the long way round, cold and irritated with herself the entire time, feeling like a coward. The next morning, on her way to campus in daylight, she walked the path, and under each of the 2 dead lamps was a scatter of broken glass on the tarmac, and the housing on both lamps was cracked from the outside. They hadn't burned out. They'd been broken. Both of them. The 2 in the middle, and not the 2 at the ends, because the ones at the ends make the path look normal from either entrance. She reported it to the council and to the university. The path had lights back within a week, and a second set installed later that year. As far as Bethany knows, nothing ever happened to anyone on that path. No attack, no report, nothing in the local paper. It's entirely possible it was bored teenagers with a stone. Twice, in the same evening, in the 2 specific spots that would matter. Bethany doesn't argue with people who say that. What she says is, a shortcut is only a shortcut when it's the same as it was yesterday. The moment something about it has changed, the lights, a parked van that's never there, a gate propped open. It isn't your route anymore. It's a new route that just happens to look like yours. She adds one more thing, and I think it's the truest sentence in tonight's episode. She says the 8 minutes she saved on all those other days were free. The 8 minutes she spent going the long way round were the only ones that ever cost her anything, and she has never once resented them since. Breathe. Rain. Story 5. Story 5. The Man with the Dog Lead. This story comes from a woman named Maren, and it happened in 2016, in a small city in Norway, in winter. Maren was walking home from a friend's house at around 10 at night, along a residential street with deep snow banked at the curbs. It was very cold and very quiet. The particular silence you only get with snow, where every sound is close and dry. A man was coming the other way, holding a dog lead. No dog on the end of it. He was calling, softly, Bella, Bella, and looking into the gardens and the dark between houses. Maren's whole body relaxed at the sight of him, and that reaction is the reason she tells this story, because a man alone in the dark is a question, and a man alone in the dark looking for his lost dog is an answer. He has a reason to be there. He has a reason to be looking around. He has a reason to speak to you, and you have a reason to want to help. He asked her, as they drew level, if she'd seen a small brown dog. She said she hadn't. He looked genuinely upset. He asked, would she mind, just for a minute, helping him check the alley behind the houses, because Bella had run that way, and he was worried about the road. And Maren said yes. She wants that on the record too. She said yes, immediately, because a stranger's dog was in danger, and she was the person who helped. They walked 20 meters towards the alley entrance together, and in those 20 meters, she noticed one thing, and the one thing saved the night. The lead in his hand had no collar attached and no clip. It was a loop of cord with a handle. Not a dog lead. A length of rope with a wrist strap. She stopped walking. She said, in the most ordinary voice she could produce, that she'd just remembered she was late, and that she'd knock on the houses along the road and ask them to look out for Bella. And then she turned and walked, briskly, not running, back to the street, and she started knocking on doors. Actual doors. The first one that opened, she stepped inside and asked them to call the police. By the time anyone came out to look, the man was gone. No one in the neighborhood had lost a dog. No one recognized him. Police took the report, and the local paper ran a small warning, and 3 other women came forward over the following weeks who'd been asked to help find Bella on the same handful of streets. Nobody was hurt. Nobody was caught either. Maren says the thing she can't shake isn't the rope. It's how completely she'd relaxed at the sight of the lead, before she'd looked at it properly. The prop did all the work. He didn't need to be convincing. He only needed to be explicable. Her rule now is small and specific, and she offers it to anyone who wants it. Help from the street. Call someone. Knock on doors. Phone the police for them. Do all of that gladly. But don't walk anywhere with the reason. If the reason is real, it survives you staying where you are. Story 6 is waiting, and it's a quieter one, for the part of the night where you're mostly gone. Story 6, 11 minutes from home. Now, back to Hannah, from the top of the episode. The woman who stopped and heard the footsteps behind her stop too. This was 2015, in Dublin. Hannah was 24, walking home from a late shift at a restaurant, about 20 minutes, mostly along a main road, and then 5 minutes of quieter streets at the end. She had done this walk 4 or 5 nights a week for 2 years. She'd first heard the footsteps somewhere on the main road, and thought nothing of it. Plenty of people walk home at midnight. It was only when she shifted her bag, that small unconscious pause, and heard the silence behind her, that the ordinary sound turned into something with intent behind it. She tested it, because she needed to be sure. She slowed down. The steps slowed. She sped up. The steps sped up. She crossed the road at an angle, without looking back, and heard the steps cross behind her, at the same angle, a few seconds later. Now, Hannah's estate was 11 minutes away, and this is where she made the decision the whole story turns on. She did not go home. Same instinct as Aisha, all those miles away, and the same conclusion. Her front door was the worst possible destination, because arriving at it would tell a stranger where she slept. Instead, she walked to a petrol station on the main road, 4 minutes in the other direction, and she went inside and stood in the light. The man came in about a minute later. He bought a bottle of water. He was completely unremarkable. 30s, jacket, nothing you could put in a description. He looked at her twice while he queued. Then he left, and stood outside near the air pump, on his phone, for 11 minutes. Hannah stayed inside. She told the young man behind the counter what was happening, and he did exactly the right thing. He didn't argue, didn't tell her she was imagining it, and he called the guards. She waited in a bright shop with a stranger for 20 minutes, and at some point the man outside walked off down the main road. The guards drove her home. There was no crime to report. A man had walked in the same direction as a woman for 15 minutes, and had bought a bottle of water, and had stood outside a petrol station on his phone. That's all that had happened. That's all that ever happens, in most of these stories, right up until the night it isn't. Hannah changed her walk after that. Not the route, the habits. She varies her timing by 10 or 15 minutes. She has 3 places along the way she knows are open and staffed at night, and she knows exactly how many minutes she is from each of them at every point in the walk. She calls someone for the last 5 minutes, and she has never, since that night, walked the final quiet stretch to her door while something felt wrong behind her. She says the thing people get wrong about that night is thinking it was about being brave. It wasn't. She was terrified the entire time, and she made every decision badly and slowly, and one of them, turning away from home instead of towards it, happened to be the right one. She says, "You don't have to be calm, you just have to not go home. That's the first 6. If you're still with me, stay. The stories keep going. Slower now, softer, for as long as you need them. If you're at the edge of sleep, let go. That's what this is for. And whenever you surface, tonight or tomorrow, subscribe if these stories kept you company. Leave a like so more of the sleepless find their way here. And tell us in the comments, what's the walk you'll never take the same way again? Sleep well. Lock your doors. The rain will still be here,